Good evening, friends. We'll now try to go through the second part of summing up and conclusion of the Sacred Doctrine. We have covered the first part. Now we are going to consider the second part. Second part is something like this. It starts by saying, there is but one indivisible and absolute omniscience and intelligence in the universe. The statement is like this. We'll have to follow it very carefully and keep this in our minds when we are studying the Sacred Doctrine. There is but one indivisible and absolute omniscience and intelligence in the universe. And this thrills throughout every atom and every point that comes into contact in this infinity. And this intelligence thrills throughout every atom and every point that comes into contact in this infinity, in this infinite world or universe. So, the whole of infinity or cosmos, which has no bounds, no boundaries, and which people call space, considered independently of anything contained in it. I'll read this paragraph once again. I've prepared these notes after a lot of study, but then it has to be intelligible, it has to be understood. There is but one indivisible and absolute omniscience and intelligence in the universe, and this thrills throughout every atom and every point that comes into contact with infinity. And the whole infinity or cosmos, which has no bounds and which people call space, considered independently of anything contained in it. The whole order of nature evinces a progressive march towards a higher life. The whole order of nature evinces a progressive march towards higher life. There is design in the action of the seemingly blindest forces. The whole process of evolution, with its endless adaptations, is a proof of this. The whole process of evolution, with its endless adaptations and variety, is a proof of this. The immutable laws that weed out the weak and feeble species to make room for the strong, and which ensure the survival of the fittest, though appearing to be so cruel in their immediate action, all are working towards the grand end. There is a design in the action of the seemingly blindest forces. The whole process of evolution, with its endless adaptations and variety, is a proof of this. The immutable laws that weed out the weak and feeble species to make room for the strong, and which ensure the survival of the fittest, though appearing so cruel in their immediate action, all are working towards the grand end. The very fact that adaptations do occur, that the fittest do survive in the struggle for existence, shows that what is called unconscious nature is in reality an aggregate of forces manipulated by semi-intelligent beings or elementals, guided by high planetary spirits, whose collective aggregate forms the manifested or unmanifested logos and constituted at one and the same time the mind of the universe and its immutable law. The very fact that adaptations do occur, that the fittest do survive in the struggle for existence, shows that what is called unconscious nature is in reality an aggregate of forces manipulated by semi intelligent beings or elementals guided by high planetary spirits, whose collective aggregate forms in the manifested as well as unmanifested logos, and they're constituted at one and the same time the mind, the universal mind, the mind of the logos of the universe and its immutable law. The law which cannot be changed, immutable law. And the mind, mind of the logos. Logos means the ultimate deity or ultimate Parabrahman. Nature taken in its abstract sense. Nature, if you want to understand in its abstract sense, not in the concrete sense, but in the abstract sense, cannot be unconscious. Nature, taken in its abstract sense, cannot be unconscious, as it is the emanation from and thus an aspect of the absolute consciousness. Whose consciousness is absolute? The Logos, the Parabrahman's consciousness is always absolute. Nature, taken in its abstract sense, cannot be unconscious, as it is the emanation from and thus an aspect of the absolute consciousness. Because it is part of that absolute consciousness, we cannot say it is unconscious in a way. So, where is that daring man who would presume to, where is the daring man who would presume to deny to vegetation and even to minerals a consciousness of their own? So, can we say the vegetation has no consciousness of its own, or minerals, they do not have a consciousness of their own? But where have they got their consciousness from? From the absolute consciousness. So, everything that is emanating from that absolute deity or Parabrahman, as we call, as it is nature, we cannot call it as unconscious. It is the consciousness of the absolute or the Parabrahman. We have to understand this, we have to keep this in mind, keep this in our heart. The entire consciousness which we see, in whatever form it is all belonging to the absolute consciousness, the absolute consciousness of the Parabrahman. So we cannot say the vegetation and even minerals do not have consciousness. They do have consciousness, and that's part of the absolute consciousness. So all we can say is that this consciousness, all that we can say is that this consciousness is beyond our comprehension. We cannot understand it so easily. Anything you see is belonging to him, belonging to the Parabrahman. So we don't seem to understand, we don't seem to comprehend. And that's why it said, all we can say is that this consciousness is beyond our comprehension. So we see it in the mineral, we see it in the elemental, we see it in the vegetable, we see it in the animal, we see it in so many forms. The smallest ant to the biggest animal, the elephant maybe. So we see the consciousness in every bit of these beings, whether it is vegetable, whether it is mineral, whether it is animal, whether it is man. Man has also moved from the original stone-aged man. At that point of time, he had some consciousness, and now he is someone who is raising in consciousness and trying to raise his consciousness to the level where he would perform the functions which are otherwise functioned by very advanced souls. So this is what we are not able to comprehend, the consciousness which is there before us. So, whatever may be the destiny of these, or what will happen to them in the near future or in the remote future, we have to prove the following facts. We have to prove the following facts. We have to prove means we have to understand and then assimilate the following facts. 1. The secret doctrine teaches no atheism except in the Hindu sense of the word Nastika, or the rejection of idols, including every anthropomorphic god. This is what secret doctrine teaches. Secret doctrine teaches no atheism. It says there is a universal consciousness. There is the Logos which has the consciousness, whose consciousness we are not able to comprehend. So, secret doctrine does propose that there is the existence of the consciousness of the Parabrahman. So, secret doctrine teaches no atheism, except in the Hindu sense of the word Nastika. Who is the Nastika according to the Hindu sense? The chap who doesn't believe in God. So, here what the secret doctrine is proposing is that the God is not an idol, the God is not in something which the man has manufactured and called him God. So that's what is called anthropomorphic God. So this is something which is one of the first fact which we need to understand, assimilate. Secret doctrine teaches no atheism. It means it believes in the universal consciousness and the consciousness of the Parabrahman. But if you understand what is atheism, the way the Hindu Sanatana Dharma people call it as Nastika, means a person who doesn't believe in God. That is how Nastika is understood by the Sanatana Dharma. But what a secret doctrine says, that God is not residing in idols. Similarly, God is not residing in the forms which man has found out or man has invented. So, in that sense, every occultist or every member who wants to study secret doctrine and understand occultism is a Nastika. Right? Second, what is the second proposal? It admits a Logos, a Parabrahman, or a collective creator of the universe. The philosophy admits, the secret doctrine admits a Logos or a Parabrahman or a collective creator of the universe, in the sense implied when one speaks of an architect as the creator of a structure. There is a creator, we have to understand that particular term in the sense implied when one speaks of an architect as the creator of a structure, whereas that architect has never touched one stone of it. He has not participated in actual construction, but he has only done a planning of it. He only knows how to draw a picture and say how it should look like. So, it admits a Logos or Parabrahman, the creator of the universe, and in the sense implied when one speaks of an architect as the creator of an edifice or a structure, whereas that architect has never touched one stone of it, but while furnishing the plan, left all the manual labor to the masons. In our case, the plan was furnished by the ideation of the universe, and the constructive labor was left to the hosts of intelligent powers and forces. So, this is the difference. While the architect has never touched a stone in the ordinary sense of the term when he is trying to bring up a building, while furnishing a plan, left all the manual labor to the care of the masons. In our case, in the occultist case, the plan was furnished by the ideation of the universe. The ideation has happened where? The ideation has taken birth where? In the consciousness of the Parabrahman. In our case, the plan was furnished by the ideation of the universe, which has happened from the consciousness of the ultimate being, whom we call Parabrahman. And the constructive labor was left to the hosts of intelligent powers. Hosts means number of them, intelligent powers and forces. But that is no personal deity. All these people who have helped to form or helped to construct, they are all definitely people belonging to a higher atmosphere. But that group of people who have actually helped in the constructive of the universe, who are intelligent powers or forces, they cannot be called or they cannot be equated with a personal God or personal deity. Or we can't call him an imperfect extra cosmic God, but only the aggregate of the spiritual intelligences and the other forces. So there are a lot of people who have helped. The ideation has come from Parabrahman, but there are so many advanced agencies who have actually helped in building up this universe. So all of them cannot be called personal deity or an imperfect cosmic God, but only the aggregate of all the spiritual influences or intelligences who have actually created the universe. This is the second proposition or second idea. Then third, as to the later, that means as to the persons whom we are thinking about, or people who are responsible for their being part of construction of the universe, they are dual in their character. They are dual in their character, being composed of the irrational brute energy inherent in matter. They are dual in their character, being composed of irrational brute energy inherent in matter, and the intelligent soul or cosmic consciousness which directs and guides that energy, and which is the thought of the spiritual intelligences reflecting the ideation of the universal mind. So follow this very carefully. We have talked about intelligent forces working out the ideation which has come out or which has been born from the Parabrahman's mind, universal mind. Now, talking about that, these intelligent forces, they are dual in their character. They have two ways in which they work. One, the irrational brute energy. They don't think, they simply follow something which has been handed down to them. That's why it is said, the irrational brute energy inherent in matter. Where is that energy stored? It is in matter. And the intelligent soul or cosmic consciousness which directs and guides that energy, and which is the thought of the spiritual intelligence, is reflecting the ideation of the universal mind. This energy which is stored in matter is being guided by the intelligent soul or cosmic consciousness. So that's where the matter is taking a particular direction from the intelligent soul or cosmic consciousness. And that is the thought of the spiritual intelligences reflecting the ideation of the universal mind. So whatever is happening in the universal mind, whatever is appearing in the Parabrahman's mind, that is being executed using the brute energy, using the matter by the intelligent agencies which are there in the universe. So this is, I believe, we have made ourselves clear in this. This results in perpetual series of physical manifestations and moral effects on earth. During evolutionary periods, the whole being subservient to karma. You see this. This results in perpetual series of physical manifestations. This coming together of matter and spiritual intelligences and executing the idea, universal idea which is there in Brahman's mind. This results in perpetual series of physical manifestations and moral effects on earth. So this is what's happening. A universe is coming, existing for some time. Some time means not exactly in our way in which we understand. It is there for kalpas, yugas. So this results in perpetual series of physical manifestations, srushti, and moral effects on earth. So how a person should live or bound by moral influences on earth during evolutionary periods, during the time in which the evolution is taking place. And the whole being is subservient to karma. So karma is the ruling force, and as per the karma, the entire being is directed to live a kind of life which will have the moral effects while living on earth. Meaning, he will be morally bound by the influences of the law of karma. This is what is happening during the evolution. At that process, in this process, everything is not perfect. In this process, everything is not perfect, and since, however, many proofs it may exhibit of a guiding intelligence behind the veil, it still shows gaps and flaws and even results very often in evident failures. Therefore, neither the collective host nor any of the working powers individually are proper subject for divine honors or worship. So, everything is not perfect because the person who is directing all this is behind a veil, is not to be seen even by those super intelligences, is not visible for them. So, the entire method of guiding the intelligence from behind the veil. Veil means a big cover or a screen. Since the guiding intelligence is being present or guiding from behind the veil, it still shows gaps and flaws and even results very often in evident failures. Therefore, neither the collective host nor any of the working powers individually are proper subjects for divine honors or worship. So, whether they have understood exactly what the universal consciousness wants them to execute is something to be debated upon, because they have not understood, there are definitely gaps and flaws. The superior intelligences also may not exactly understand what is expected out of them, and so the reason is there is the intelligence, super intelligence working from behind the veil. And therefore, we say the collective host, the demiurgos is, that's the name, demiurgos, Demiurgos. You can see the spelling means collective host, and the powers individually, they are not perhaps working so well because they are using their own intelligence and understanding and executing. So there are gaps, there are shortfalls, that's what it says. So they are not working in such a way that they would be eligible for divine honors or people to worship them or the universal consciousness to recognize them as well done. So there are gaps. All are entitled to the grateful reverence. All are entitled to the grateful reverence of humanity. However, and man ought to be ever striving to help the divine evolution of ideas by becoming to the best of his ability a co-worker with nature in the cyclic task. All are entitled to be grateful reverence of humanity. All these people who are working with the ultimate consciousness or the universal consciousness, the ideation which is occurring in the universal mind, and all these executors, we have to be grateful to them. We have to be reverential to them. All are entitled to the grateful reverence of humanity. The entire humanity has to be respectfully work with them, co work with them. However, and man ought to be ever striving to help the divine evolution of ideas by becoming the best of his ability a co worker with nature in the cyclic task. So, what is the duty of a person who is wanting to help an evolution is he will cooperate with the nature, he will become a willing co-worker with nature, and he will assist in the cyclic task. What is the cyclic task? The universe appears, exists for some time, and then it disappears. And another universe comes, it exists for some time, and it goes. This is the cyclic task. So the entire thing is visualized or imagined, or ideation is of belonging to the universal consciousness, and there are agencies which try to put them into place. They execute that, but there are flaws in execution. But even though all that may be true, the humanity has to pay their reverence, and they are always supposed to be grateful to these universal intelligent forces working for the evolution. And how will we play our role? By becoming a co-worker, by becoming the best of our ability, a co-worker with nature. We have to understand the nature, we have to understand the laws of nature and cooperate with the laws of nature, and we become a co-worker with nature in the cyclic task. Right. The ever unknowable and incognizable cause alone, the ever unknowable and incognizable cause alone, the causeless cause of all causes, should have its shrine and altar on the holy and ever untrodden ground of our heart, invisible, intangible, unmentioned, except through the still small voice of our spiritual consciousness. What a beautiful statement. The ever unknowable and incognizable cause alone, the causeless cause of all causes, should have its shrine and altar on the holy and even untrodden ground of our heart, invisible, intangible, unmentioned, except through the still small voice of our spiritual consciousness. There is a small voice in our consciousness which is spiritual. Antarvani is something people say, but Atma Sakshi is something some people say. It has got a voice, the voice which can be heard when everything is silent. So, they are ever unknowable. However much we try, there may be something which we don't know in the ultimate. So that's why we say, while describing the ultimate Parabrahman, that is unknowable. We can't even think of him. That's why we said in the initial introduction that he is achintya. We can't even think of him. So we can't know him. We don't know him completely. And incognizable. We can't even understand with our mind, or we can't recognize using our comprehension. So it is impossible. Achintya, avachya. We can't even talk about him. So the ever unknowable and incognizable cause alone. He is responsible for everything. But that universal force, that ultimate Parabrahman, is not knowable and not recognizable, and he is the causeless cause of all causes. He is the reason, he is the cause for all that is happening in the universe. He is the causeless cause of all causes. See how the cause was used. He is the causeless cause of all causes. So, if there is any cause, if you want to work out the root where it is with him. So, that particular force, that universal force, we cannot understand, we cannot recognize. So, he is the Karana. Mahakarana Karanam, they say. He is Mahakarana Karanam, means there is a Karana, but for all that Karana, there is a Mahakarana. That is the ultimate universe, the ultimate consciousness. The ever unknowable, incognizable cause. Karana is cause. He is responsible for everything. He is the cause for everything. But we are talking about Mahakarana, Karana for all Karanas. So that is the universal consciousness or the Parabrahman's consciousness. So the ever unknowable, incognizable cause alone, the causeless cause of all causes, should have its shrine where we should worship him, where we should worship that universal consciousness or Parabrahman. It is said the man should have his shrine and altar, or that universal consciousness should have the shrine and altar, means the place where worship is done, on the holy and ever untrodden ground of our heart, invisible, intangible, unmentioned, except through the still small voice of our spiritual consciousness. So that's where we can worship him or hold him. That is the shrine in which we can place that universal consciousness. And we have never touched that ground, we have never walked on that ground, untrodden ground of our heart. We have not walked in that particular heart, we have not touched that portion of the heart. It is invisible. That heart of ours also is invisible. We are not talking about the physical heart, mind you. So that heart is invisible, intangible. We can't touch that. Atma is perhaps what it is. Ground of our heart, the untrodden ground of our heart, invisible. We can't see it. Intangible. We can't touch it. Unmentioned. We can't talk about it except through the still small voice of our spiritual consciousness. So there is a voice attached to the spiritual consciousness of which I am a part of. The spiritual consciousness is part of me. That spiritual consciousness has got a voice. Only through that voice, maybe I'll be able to recognize him or able to hear him, perhaps, if he has to say something personal to me. So that's it. The ever unknowable, incognizable cause alone, the causeless cause of all causes, should have its shrine and altar on the holy and even untrodden ground of our heart, invisible, intangible, unmentioned, except through the small, still voice of our spiritual consciousness. The still small voice, actually it is that way, the still small voice of our spiritual consciousness. Those who worship before it ought to do so in the silence and sanctified solitude of their souls. Those who worship before it, before that altar, before the shrine which is there in our heart, those who worship before it ought to do so in the silence and the sanctified solitude of their souls. The souls should be very pure and silent. That is how we can worship that particular universal consciousness in our soul. Those who worship before it ought to do so in the silence and the sanctified solitude of their souls. We are absolutely alone when we are with our soul. So, in that solitude of the souls which we are enjoying, that is the time when we try to worship that universal consciousness through the small, still voice which is attached to our spiritual consciousness. So this is how we can touch him, we can talk to him, we can perhaps hear him. Making the spirit the sole mediator, making the spirit the sole mediator between them and the universal spirit. Their good actions, the only priests, and their sinful intentions, the only visible and objective sacrificial victims to the presence. So this is the other part of the sentence which says, making their spirit, consciousness, it means making their consciousness the sole mediator between them and the universal spirit. So the one thing which is existing as a bridge, as a mediator between the universal consciousness and my spiritual consciousness is that spirit, that consciousness. Their good actions, the only priests. So, whatever good we do, perhaps they do the work which a priest does normally in a shrine. And their sinful intentions, the only visible and objective sacrificial victims to the presence. So, whatever good we do, the actions of the good will be like the actions of a priest. Whatever sinful intentions we have, it will be like a sacrificial victims. Sacrificial means what we need to separate from us and offer it as a sacrifice. What is impure in me, I offer it as a sacrifice, saying that I no longer want to go with it. I want to sacrifice it. I want to become pure. My consciousness has to become pure. This is what I am trying. Then the next proposal, matter is eternal. Next postulate is matter is eternal. It is the physical basis for the one infinite universal mind to build thereon its ideations. What is matter? Matter you cannot destroy. Matter is eternal. If you destroy one form, it is available in another form. So matter is eternal. It is the physical basis for the one infinite universal mind to build thereon its ideations. The universal mind has got a lot of plans, lot of ideas. So for all that to come to a shape, matter is required. And this matter is always eternal. It cannot be destroyed. That means it is something which is there on a sustainable basis. We cannot wish it away. Matter is eternal. It is the physical basis for the one infinite universal mind to build thereon its ideations. So the universal mind, whatever plans it has, those plans are executed using this matter which is eternal. So matter is important. Matter cannot be destroyed. Matter cannot be said, it's finished. So therefore, the esoterists maintain that there is no inorganic or dead matter in nature. This is the most important statement we find in the secret doctrine. Therefore, the esoterists means people who believe in esotericism, the secret occultism. Therefore, the occultists maintain that there is no inorganic or dead matter in nature. There is only living matter. So there is no death to the matter, it is always eternal, and there is no inorganic or dead matter in nature. The distinction between the two made by science being unfounded as it is arbitrary and devoid of any reason. The science says organic and inorganic. And what the secret doctrine says and what the occultism says, the distinction between the two made by science is not well founded. It is arbitrary and devoid of reason because there is no inorganic or dead matter, or for that matter, dead atom in nature. Every atom is living. So there is no inorganic or dead matter in nature. This is the profound statement of the secret doctrine. So there is nothing, even if you see a table, even if it's a table, we may say the table has no life. Table cannot respond. But there are so many atoms which have gone in to make that plank which is there on the top of the table, right? So there are so many atoms which are there. All the atoms, whether you call it inorganic or organic, they are all with life. So that's why people say you don't drag a table, you lift the table and put it somewhere because there is life in it. You don't drag the table, you lift the table and place it differently. For two reasons you lift it, because it's heavy, maybe it has got also life. You don't drag it and make a sound and make that atoms feel different. So this is something which we need to remember. There is no dead matter. There is nothing like inorganic and organic. There is only one atom. All the atoms have life and matter is eternal. Matter cannot be destroyed. And therefore the esotericists or people who believe in esotericism, they maintain that there is no inorganic or dead matter in nature. The distinction between the two made by science as inorganic and organic is not well founded, and it's arbitrary and devoid of any reason. So it is defying logic, says the secret doctrine. Then, the fifth postulate, the universe was evolved, the universe, not universal, the universe was evolved out of its ideal plan. The universe was evolved out of its ideal plan, upheld through eternity in the unconsciousness of the Absolute. The universe was evolved out of the ideal plan, out of the best plan, upheld through eternity. Again, eternity is something which we understand with the universal consciousness. The universe was evolved out of its ideal plan, upheld through eternity in the unconsciousness of the Absolute. There is nothing like consciousness. There is only one thing. That's super consciousness is what is there in the Absolute. So, that is the thing which has put the plan into its proper place. The universe was evolved out of its ideal plan, upheld through eternity in the unconsciousness or consciousness of the Absolute. The transcendental reality means the reality which goes from stage to stage or transcends from one stage to another stage, believed in by occultists, often appearing merely a personification of a force behind a phenomena, an infinite and eternal energy from which all things proceed. This is a beautiful poem in fact. The universe was evolved out of its ideal plan, upheld through eternity in the unconsciousness or consciousness of the Absolute. That transcendental reality, that reality which goes from place to place or from stage to stage, transcending all the barriers, believed by occultists, often appearing merely a personification of a force behind phenomena. So something is taking shape. And what is the thing which is behind this universal force? Is behind everything which is happening in this universe. So personification of a force behind the phenomena, an infinite and eternal energy from which all things proceed. So everything is coming out of that particular force or that particular energy field or that particular consciousness. And that is infinite, eternal energy. Infinite and eternal energy. So there is no question of saying, even when the entire manifestation has been withdrawn, that consciousness or that life or that super consciousness is not there. It has gone back to that. The entire creation has gone back into that consciousness from where everything will come out of it. So we have seen those diagrams, the small dot appearing, and it is dividing the whole globe into two. So if you remember all those diagrams, the entire force, the entire universal consciousness, everything is coming out of that consciousness and everything returns to that consciousness. So we think that we are separate, but we are not separate. We are part of that universal consciousness, is something which we need to understand and follow. Then, the secret doctrine teaches that the whole universe is ruled by intelligent and semi-intelligent forces and powers as stated from the very beginning. We have covered this sometime back in the third proposal or third proposition. This proposition means a postulate. I am not referring to the fundamental propositions, but while talking about this, summing up, whatever points are coming, we are calling them as postulates or proposals put before us for our consideration. So the secret doctrine teaches that the whole universe is ruled by intelligent and semi-intelligent forces and powers as stated from the very beginning. There is not one finger's breadth of void space in the whole boundless universe. Can you imagine this? There is not one finger's breadth. My voice is choking as I am talking about it. There is not one finger's breadth of void space in the whole boundless universe. So everywhere, every bit, every inch a portion of an inch is covered by that universal consciousness. This is what it is. There is not one finger breadth of void space. No space is vacant. Not even an inch of space is vacant. Everything is filled with that boundless consciousness, which is called the universe or universal consciousness. All that which emanates from the Absolute, all that which emanates from the Absolute, which from this qualification alone stands as the one and only reality. Hence, everything extraneous to the Absolute, the generative and causative element, must be an illusion almost undeniably. All that which is emanating from the Absolute, which from the qualification alone stands as one and the only reality. So everything belongs to this consciousness. There is nothing which doesn't belong to this consciousness. So if somebody is saying, other than Absolute, there is something which has come up, there is some other reason and something else has come up. If somebody is saying that, somebody is proposing that. So hence everything extraneous to the Absolute means which is not covered by Absolute. There is something else which is appearing. If somebody says that, the generative and causative element, if there is a generative element, means something which is giving birth to that particular element, something which is a root cause for that sort of element which is extraneous to the Absolute, which is not belonging to the Absolute. If somebody proposes that sort of a thing is existing, it must be an illusion, it's not real. Most undeniably, it is an illusion. Means there is nothing which is not part of universal consciousness. If somebody is proposing, yes, this is not covered by universal consciousness, and if we want to see how that particular thing has come about and what is the reason for it, it must be an illusion, says the Secret Doctrine. Everything is relative in this universe. Everything is an illusion. See this. Having said whatever extraneous to the universal consciousness is illusion, now everything is relative in this universe. Everything is an illusion. But the experience of any plane is an actuality for the percipient being, the person who has perception. He is called the percipient being. Everything is relative in this universe. Everything is an illusion. Because if I have no perception of all this which we have talked about now, if I have no perception, if I don't realize it with my inner core of my heart, then it's illusion, isn't it? But if I understand it, relatively speaking, it is a fact. So everything is relative in this universe, everything also is an illusion. But the experience of any plane is an actuality for the percipient being whose consciousness is on that plane, though the said experience, regarded from the purely metaphysical standpoint, may be conceived to have no objective reality. So, the experience of any plane is an actuality for the percipient being whose consciousness is on that plane. If I am on the physical plane, all that is related to the physical plane, I am able to understand it, I am able to perceive it, then it's a reality. And whatever is existing in the next plane, I am not able to see, so it is an illusion, right? I am not able to feel it, I am not able to see it in the next plane, whatever is there in the next plane. But in this plane where I have perception, where I am able to have that sense of understanding, it is a reality. So, regarded from the purely metaphysical standpoint, may be conceived to have no objective reality. So, if you say metaphysical means not something which is physical, but something which is related to the mind. So, if it is something to do with the mind, and if I am not able to comprehend with my mind, then it is not an objectively real thing, because it is something which my mind is able to comprehend, but I am not able to touch it, I am not able to feel it. So I may say physically it is not there, but metaphysically it is there. So everything is relatively existing and everything is also an illusion from this standpoint. I guess you have understood this. Whatever we see on this plane, because we have had the experience of this plane, we are able to comprehend it. But the next plane, which we are not able to see with these eyes, whatever is there existing, it is an illusion to us, isn't it? This is what it is trying to say. HPP says, some 15 years ago, the writer was the first to repeat the wise commandments in the esoteric philosophy. Close thy mouth, lest thou should speak of this mystery, and thy heart, lest thou should think aloud. And if thy heart has escaped thee, bring it back to its place, for such is the object of our alliance. So this is the quotation which is appearing, and HPB is quoting this. Some 15 years ago, the writer was the first to repeat the wise commandments in the esoteric catechism, means esoteric philosophy. And what are those words? Close thy mouth, that means close your mouth, lest as thou should speak of this mystery. So don't talk about this mystery, just feel it. Just don't talk about it, don't discuss it. Close thy mouth, lest thou shouldn't speak of this. Speaking will only downsize it. Speaking will only downsize it. If you don't speak, if you keep on thinking about it, there is no end to the consciousness which we can expand and try to understand. So we may look that our consciousness is limited. When we start thinking, when we start meditating, the consciousness keeps on expanding. There is no limit to it. There is no end to it. And it keeps on expanding. So, close thy mouth, lest thou shouldn't speak of this mystery. So don't talk about this mystery, just comprehend it. Then, and thy heart, lest thou shouldn't think aloud. So whatever is there in the heart also, don't talk it loud, don't discuss, don't bring it into loud thinking. Loud thinking sometimes is audible to others. So don't even do that. And if thy heart has escaped thee, bring it back to its place. Suppose your thinking, your consciousness is not thinking of this wonderful superconsciousness or absolute consciousness. Using your consciousness, if you are not able to go anywhere near it, if it is going away from that particular path in which you have to approach and travel, if it is going away, bring it back to its place. That means whenever it detours, bring it back and think about this universal consciousness. Your consciousness, universal consciousness. Your consciousness, you may think you have limitations, but it has no limitation. It goes on expanding. As you think, it goes on expanding. So, close thy mouth, lest thou shouldn't speak of this mystery, and thy heart, lest thou shouldn't think aloud. And if thy heart has escaped thee, suppose you are there and your heart has gone elsewhere, bring it back to its place, for such is the object of our alliance. So that's how we'll have to proceed and understand, and together we need to travel, is perhaps the statements given by masters. And again, this is a secret which gives death. Close thy mouth, lest thou shouldst reveal it to the vulgar. Compress thy brain, lest something should escape from it and fall outside. Rules of initiation. So these are all the rules of initiation. A lot of people, they discuss masters, they talk about masters. Suppose they say they're doing a work, they say it's master's work I'm doing. Who said? You're doing the work which has been, you found it is right, but don't involve masters there, don't drag their name there, don't dilute their name there. It's important to keep them at a reverential pedestal, and you raise your consciousness to their level, not bring their consciousness to your level. So this is something which you should do. And even if you get advice, even if you get maybe some message, don't discuss it with others. With that oath taken from the sadhaka, the masters convey their messages. So if the sadhaka keeps on discussing with others, that will be the last message they will receive. So this is very important thing which one should understand. So this is a secret which gives death. Close thy mouth lest thou should reveal it to the vulgar. So don't talk about to people who do not deserve. They have not got the eligibility to listen to all this. Don't discuss with them. Don't discuss these things with them. That's the rule. Close thy mouth lest thou should reveal it to the vulgar. Vulgar means people who are profane in the world, people who are belonging to this physical world, physical comforts. So there's no point in talking to those people. So don't keep your mouth open, don't talk about it, don't discuss it. That's what it means. Compress thy brain lest something should escape from it and fall outside. So if there is something which has entered your brain or consciousness, put a lid to it, enjoy it, be with it, but don't release it to outside. Release it to others who have no eligibility. This is a very important rule of the initiation. Initiation is done to those people who have got eligibility. They are accepted as disciples. So this is what she is saying. A few years later, a corner of the veil of this Isis had to be lifted. Isis is nature. A few years later, a corner of this veil of Isis had to be lifted, and now another and a larger rent is made. Sometime back, few years later, a corner of the veil of the Isis had to be lifted. So sometime back, a portion of the natures has been uncovered. A portion of the nature is uncovered. Means the veil which was there on the nature was removed. A portion of it was removed. Now another and a larger rent is made. Means now there is another approach, another method by which some more information is revealed to all of you. Sometime back, the nature of the consciousness was revealed, or the veil which was there on the Isis, which is nature, was removed. Now further, another attempt has been made to remove some more cover so that more information is made available to humanity. So by writing Secret Doctrine, she says, I am opening up. By writing Isis Unveiled, she said, I have opened up already in the past. Now, while I am writing the Secret Doctrine, I am opening up further and giving the knowledge to humanity, wisdom to humanity. But old and time-honored errors, such as become with every day more glaring and self-evident, stand arrayed in battle order now. And they did then. Marshaled by blind conservatism, conceit, and prejudice, they are constantly on the watch, ready to strangle every truth which, awakening from its age-long sleep, happens to knock for admission. But old and time-honored errors. There are so many errors which have happened during the passage of time. They are all old, they are all time-honored. Errors means errors which have happened in the process of time, such as become with every day more glaring and self-evident. All these errors are appearing very, very openly, very self-evident. Nobody need to explain these errors. They are glaring, means everybody can see that. And they stand arrayed in battle order now. So all these errors are appearing, and we need to fight out and remove these errors as they did then. So, marshaled by blind conservatism, conceit, and prejudice, they are constantly on the watch, ready to strangle every truth which, awakening from its age-long sleep, happens to knock for admission. So, there are a lot of people who are blind by conservatism. Blind by conservatism means they think what they think is right. They are conservative in their approach. They are not allowing anything new to come in. And they have got conceit. They have got conceit means they have a feeling that they know everything. And they are very proud of that. That is conceit. And prejudice prejudice that nobody else other than them know anything. They've got the prejudgment. So these people are all there, and they're trying to strangle the truth. They're always trying to suppress truth. So if that truth wakes up, from the long sleep, because people have forced it, kept it under their grip, happens to knock for admission. So the information is available for those who knock the door, they say. So if you're prepared to knock the door and find out the truth, yes, yours is the truth. Such has been the case ever since man became an animal. That this proves in every case moral death to the revealers who bring to light any of these old truths is as certain as that it gives life and regeneration to those who are fit to profit even by the little that is now revealed to them. So that this proves in every case moral death to the revealers. So whatever information which we are now bringing out, so this is actually in a way moral death to the revealers, she says, because other people are trying to stop this, and we are trying our best to present these truths. So this is proving to be in every case moral death to the revealers who bring to light any of these old truths. They are trying to bring out all these old truths into existence. This is as certain as that gives life and regeneration to those who are fit to profit even by the little that is now revealed to them. So whatever little has been revealed to them, that is definitely profitable to them. That is as if giving life. And what is regeneration means? A person who is no more has come back to life. So these truths should evolve and should help the people to live the right kind of life. They should get regenerated. They should get life into their way of thinking. So this is how we are trying to lift the heavy veil which is there. So a portion of the veil has been removed in the past when Isis Unveiled was written, and now through this secret doctrine, another piece of corner of that universal divine plan has been revealed. Of course, there are people who are saying all this is not true, but let us understand this and live with this truth, live with this comprehension. The eternal wisdom, eternal consciousness, and the universal consciousness is something which you have to always comprehend and keep it in our consciousness, our consciousness. So our consciousness also has no limits. The universal consciousness is not bounded. So that's something which we have to keep in mind. Thank you.